I discovered that the Sunny Pines HOA was constructing 75 luxury homes on my inherited farmland. But when I uncovered my grandfather's original property surveys, their entire development suddenly became legally mine. You should have seen their faces when I revealed my trap at their own community meeting. I never imagined I'd have to fight for land that was already mine. When Grandpa Joe passed away last March, I inherited his 200-acre farm outside Meadow Creek. This land had been in our family for generations. Living in the city with a demanding job, I hadn't visited as often as I should have. Then, at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, Grandpa's neighbor of 40 years. Her voice shook with anger. "They're building houses on your property. Big yellow machines started digging yesterday. You need to come quick." At first, I thought she was mistaken. Maybe the construction workers had crossed a boundary by accident, but Mrs. Thompson wasn't one to exaggerate. "The Sunny Pines people put up signs everywhere," she continued. "They're planning almost 100 houses right where your East Fields are." I didn't waste a second. Throwing clothes into a suitcase, I jumped in my car and sped toward Meadow Creek, breaking speed limits the entire way. 5 hours later, I turned onto the dirt road leading to Grandpa's farmhouse. The peaceful countryside I remembered was gone, replaced by the deafening roar of heavy machinery. Dust clouds rose over the trees as I reached the hill overlooking the eastern section of the farm. My heart sank. A fleet of bulldozers and excavators was tearing into the soil where Grandpa once grew corn and soybeans. Workers in hard hats moved around like ants, marking areas with bright orange spray paint. A large sign near the road read, "Future home of Sunny Pines East, 75 luxury homes starting at $450,000. I parked and walked toward a woman standing apart from the workers. She was pristine, beige pants, a crisp white blouse, and perfectly styled hair despite the dusty surroundings. A clipboard in hand, she was deep in conversation on her phone. When she finally hung up, I stepped forward. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" She looked me up and down as if I were a door-to-door salesman wasting her time. "We're preparing for residential development," she said smoothly. Diane Reynolds, Sunny Pines Homeowners Association president, she extended a hand without an ounce of warmth. I ignored the handshake. "This is my land," I said firmly. "My grandfather, Joe Miller, owned this farm. He passed away recently, and I inherited it." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding. Sunny Pines Development purchased this parcel last year. We have all the necessary permits and approvals." "That's impossible. My grandfather would never sell this land." "Perhaps he didn't tell you," she said, almost pitying me. "The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years." My mind raced. Grandpa had been sick in his final months, but his mind was sharp. He would never have sold his beloved farm without telling me. Something wasn't right. "I need to see those documents," I demanded. "You're welcome to contact our legal department," Diane replied, handing me a business card. "But I assure you, everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a schedule to maintain." She turned away, already dialing another number. I stood there, helpless, as machines continued tearing up the land that had fed my family for generations. Before continuing the story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Thompson was waiting on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a worried expression. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained. "Your grandpa was furious. He kept saying they had no right, that they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs." "Did he ever mention selling any land?" I asked. "Never," she said, her voice firm. "Joe swore this farm would stay in your family forever." Her eyes glistened. "The day before he went to the hospital for the last time, he was looking through his old office. Said he needed to find something important to protect the farm." Grandpa's office had remained untouched since his passing. I hadn't had the heart to go through his things during my brief visit for the funeral. But now I needed answers. The small room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. Shelves lined the walls, family photo albums, and decades of records. Rainfall amounts, crop yields, equipment repairs, all written in his neat handwriting. Where would he have kept property records? The filing cabinet seemed like the logical place to start. I pulled open the top drawer and found folders neatly organized by year, but there was nothing about land sales or Sunny Pines. Hours passed as I searched. Night fell, and my eyes strained from reading faded documents under the dim lamplight. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a loose floorboard under the desk. Pressing it with my foot, I felt it shift slightly. I knelt down and pried it open with a letter opener. Inside the small hidden space was a metal box. Key hung from a nail beneath the desk. Inside the box, I found the deed to the farm, Grandpa's will naming me as his heir, and several yellowed property surveys. But what caught my attention most was a letter addressed to me, written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this," it began, "then someone's trying to take what's ours." My hands trembled as I read his words. Grandpa explained that developers had been circling his land for years, trying to pressure him into selling. He always refused. In his final months, someone from Sunny Pines had visited repeatedly. The man claimed he only needed a simple signature for a road easement, always bringing different papers each time. "I never signed away my land," Grandpa wrote. "If they say I did, it's a lie. Look at the original survey from 1910 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The truth is in the boundaries." I dug deeper into the box and pulled out the original survey. Diane squared her shoulders, gripping the court order like it personally offended her. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into," she said coolly, her voice losing its usual smoothness. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I think I do." The next few days were a blur of legal preparation, research, and uncovering the tangled web that was Sunny Pines HOA. Walter worked tirelessly, gathering every document proving my grandfather's land had been stolen through fraud. Tanya, the journalist, dug deep into public records and discovered how Diane and her associates had systematically pressured elderly landowners into selling for a fraction of the real value. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a one-time incident. It was a calculated scheme. By the time our emergency hearing arrived, I wasn't just fighting for my own inheritance. I was standing up for every family they had exploited. The courtroom was packed. Walter presented the original surveys, the property records, and the clear evidence that my grandfather's signature on the 1997 boundary change was a forgery. The judge examined the documents carefully, his frown deepening with every page. Then came the testimony. Mr. Grayson, along with several other former landowners, took the stand to explain how the HOA had targeted them with endless fines, impossible rules, and outright harassment until they were forced to sell. Tanya provided financial records showing how Diane, her husband, and the county officials had profited from each shady deal. Walter tied it all together: the fraudulent boundary changes, the forged signatures, and the illegally seized land. Diane sat stiffly at the defense table, her perfect posture the only thing holding her together. Her lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that the development had followed legal procedures, but the judge wasn't buying it. Diane, for the first time since I'd met her, looked shaken. "This little stunt will cost you," Diane said quietly, her voice measured but laced with warning. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do," I replied, my tone unwavering. 6 names on dozens of business filings, $16 million in loans using stolen land as collateral, county officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in. I hadn't planned to reveal how much I knew just yet, but the look on her face was worth it. Diane's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. Then her tone shifted, smooth and persuasive. "We can be reasonable. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland? 7 figures, immediate payment." "Not interested." Her smile returned, this time sharper, almost predatory. "Everyone has a price," she said, voice dripping with confidence. "Think about it. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old dirt? This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale." I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burn into my back. Just as I reached my car, her voice rang out again. "Commissioner Harris is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town." I drove away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right about one thing. I was an outsider here now, but she'd overlooked something important. Grandpa hadn't been. He had lived in Meadow Creek his entire life, knew everyone, and was respected, even by those who had disagreed with him, and he'd left me more than just land. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this fight, what else had he prepared? I searched more carefully, combing through every folder, every notebook. In an album labeled Community Picnic 2018, I found dozens of photos of Grandpa with neighbors, local business owners, and families who had known him forever. Each photo had names written on the back. These weren't just memories, they were connections, people who might stand with me against Sunny Pines. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Parking violation at your property. Fine, $500. Attached was a photo, my car, parked right outside Grandpa's farm, my own property. This was how it started. The pattern Mr. Grayson had described. Harassment by paperwork. But unlike the others, I knew their game now. And I had something they didn't expect. Grandpa's secret weapon, still hidden in his files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over the farm, I sat on the porch where Grandpa used to tell me stories during summer visits. The eastern fields stretched quietly before me, the construction equipment abandoned under the court order. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Diane would mobilize her connections. The real fight was coming. What she didn't realize was that I had found more than just property surveys in Grandpa's hidden box. I had found documents that didn't just question the boundary changes. They revealed exactly who had falsified them, when, and why. Diane thought she was dealing with an absent grandchild fighting for sentimental land. She had no idea she was facing the ghost of my grandfather, a man who had documented every dirty deal and suspicious approval for years, patiently building a case while they thought he was just a stubborn old farmer. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk further into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of the Sunny Pines Community Center. Tonight was the night I had been planning for weeks. Inside, nearly 100 people filled rows of folding chairs, chatting excitedly about new tennis courts and fancy streets while sipping punch from small plastic cups. At the front, Diane Reynolds stood tall in her bright red blazer, pointing at colorful images of big houses on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said, beaming at the crowd. "Our home values will soar once these new neighbors move in." Applause erupted. A few people whistled in approval. Nobody knew that what I carried in my folder would ruin their party. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to make heads turn. "I need to speak about this development." Diane's smile faltered for just a second before snapping back into place, faker than ever. "We'll take questions after the presentation," she said smoothly. "This can't wait," I replied, stepping onto the small stage. I faced the curious crowd. "My name is Alex Morgan," I announced. "My grandfather owned Willow Creek Farm for 60 years. Diane cut in quickly. "Yes, the old property we purchased. We're very grateful to finally develop that eyesore." A murmur rippled through the room. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the original land survey from 1910. I lifted another page. "And this is the updated survey from 1978. The HOA board members sat motionless behind the podium as I placed copies in front of each of them. "According to these legal documents," I continued, locking eyes with Diane, "my grandfather's land extends 80 acres farther east than what appears in current county records." I took one final step forward, making sure my voice was steady. "Put simply, you're building on land that legally belongs to me, and not just the new development. According to these boundaries," I continued, 20 existing homes, plus your clubhouse, are sitting on my property too." The room erupted. Voices shouted over each other. People stood abruptly, and a chair crashed to the floor. "This is ridiculous," Diane snapped, snatching one of the surveys from the table. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction is already underway." I stayed calm while her face turned red. "Your permits are based on incorrect property lines," I said. "I've already filed papers with the court to stop all building immediately." Gerald Fisher, the balding HOA treasurer, adjusted his thick glasses as he scrutinized the documents. His face paled. "Diane," he whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "These boundary markers match the old creek bed. They look real." Diane yanked the papers from his hands. "This is clearly some kind of trick to shake us down for money. We'll fight this nonsense." "You're welcome to try," I replied smoothly, pulling out one final document. "But you should know something. According to these legal boundaries, your house, Diane, sits entirely on land that legally belongs to me." Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Homeowners glanced at one another, the weight of realization setting in. A man in the back stood. "Are you saying we could lose our homes?" Before I could answer, Diane slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over," she declared. "Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately." As people shuffled toward the exit, their hushed whispers filled the air. A younger woman touched my arm. "I'm Rachel Winters. I just put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to me?" I hadn't expected to face the human side of this fight so directly. "I'm not trying to hurt regular people," I told her sincerely. "This is about correcting a wrong." "Don't listen to him," Diane hissed, appearing beside us. As the last of the homeowners filed out, she leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Sunny Pines from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat lingered in the air as she turned on her heel and stormed off. Through the windows, I could see worried homeowners gathering in clusters, whispering amongst themselves. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Wallace. How did it go? I typed back, they know. Get ready for their next move. What I didn't tell him was how uneasy I felt. I had lit the fuse, but was I prepared for the explosion? These weren't just property lines on a map anymore. They were people's homes, their investments, their dreams. But they had built those dreams on land stolen from my grandfather. And Diane Reynolds wasn't the type to go down without a fight. I jerked awake to the sound of engines outside my grandfather's farmhouse. Bright lights flooded through the windows. Still groggy, I stumbled onto the porch. 3 white SUVs with Sunny Pines security stamped on the sides were parked in a neat row, blocking my driveway. Several men in uniform stood nearby. One stepped forward and handed me a thick envelope. Cease and desist notice from the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association, he said flatly. You are ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action. I ripped open the envelope. Inside was a letter accusing me of fraud, claiming my documents were forged. They were demanding I pay damages for harming the community's reputation. You can't be serious, I muttered. The man shrugged. Just delivering the message. Have a nice day. He returned to his SUV, but none of them left. I decided to drive into town for breakfast, only to find that, sometime during the night, large concrete blocks had been placed across the driveway. Sorry, sir, one of the guards said, barely masking his smirk. This access point hasn't been approved by the development committee. It's been closed for safety reasons. I was trapped on my own land. Frustrated, I called the sheriff's office. The deputy on duty gave me a canned response. Sounds like a civil dispute. Best to get a lawyer. My phone buzzed. Diane's name flashed across the screen. I hadn't given her my number. Good morning, she chirped sweetly. Enjoying the view? This is harassment, I said. You can't block access to my property. Actually, she purred, according to county records, the real ones, your driveway crosses Sunny Pines' common areas. We're well within our rights to control access. You know those records are falsified? She laughed. Let me explain how this works. The county commissioner plays golf with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate firm. The water department supervisor? He lives in Sunny Pines. My stomach twisted. By tomorrow, she continued, your farmhouse will have at least 15 code violations. Your water might get shut off for maintenance. And local contractors? Well, let's just say nobody in town will be returning your calls. I gritted my teeth. That's illegal. That's small town politics, she corrected, her voice silky, smooth. You can't win this, but I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this all goes away. I'll even throw in a nice payment for your trouble, Diane added smoothly. This isn't about money, I told her. She laughed, a cold, knowing sound. It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow. The call ended. I stared at my phone, then at the security vehicles still stationed outside. They weren't leaving. True to Diane's word, by afternoon, a county inspector arrived to examine my farmhouse. He found issues with everything, the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings. He handed me a thick list of violations, all requiring thousands of dollars in immediate repairs. As he drove off, another truck pulled up. Workers hammered stakes into the ground along my property line, putting up signs. Future home of Sunny Pines East, luxury living coming soon. Then my water pressure dropped to a trickle. When I called the utility company, they claimed there was maintenance work in my area and couldn't say when service would return. That night, I sat on the porch in darkness, watching the security lights sweep across the fields where my grandfather had once grown corn. In the distance, their bulldozers sat waiting, ready to erase what was left of his legacy. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Wallace. They filed a countersuit claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. They'll keep building in the meantime. 3 months. By then, half the houses would be finished. The damage would be done. I scrolled through my contacts, desperate for options. A name caught my eye, Janet Rivera, a local reporter I hadn't spoken to in years. As I considered calling her, headlights cut through the night. A car carefully maneuvered around the concrete barriers and approached my house. My stomach tensed. Was Diane sending more trouble? The car stopped and a familiar figure stepped out. Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer, the man who had studied my documents at the meeting. He looked nervous, glancing at the security vehicles in the distance. I shouldn't be here, he muttered. Why are you here? I asked. He took a deep breath, then pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been keeping the HOA books for 7 years. There are things you need to see. Inside, at my kitchen table, Gerald opened his laptop and showed me file after file. Financial records, meeting minutes, emails. Diane and the board have been using HOA funds like their personal bank account, he explained. Special fees that disappear, contracts given to family members, reserve funds being funneled into inside businesses. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Gerald hesitated, then said, because I'm not the only homeowner who's tired of her rules, her control. When you showed up with those property documents, it was the first time I've seen her scared. He pointed to a spreadsheet. Look at this. Last year, every homeowner paid $2,000 for road repairs. The actual work cost half that. The rest? Gone. That's theft, I said. He nodded. And there's more. The 20 homes you say are on your land? The people living in them have been complaining about drainage problems for years. Diane keeps promising fixes, but nothing happens. Now we know why. She knew all along that those houses might not legally belong to the HOA. As we talked, my phone buzzed with a flood of texts from numbers I didn't recognize. We support you against Diane. The Millers, 42 Sunny Pines Lane. She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers. Can we help? Jackson family. Our children's playground equipment was removed without notice. We want to join your fight. The Rodriguez family. I looked up at Gerald, who smiled slightly. I may have shared your number with a few friends. For the first time since this battle began, I felt something I hadn't before. Hope. Diane had power, connections, money, but she had also made enemies. And now, those enemies were rallying around me. We need a plan, I said, and I think I know where to start. As Gerald left, carefully avoiding the security vehicles, I stepped onto the porch. A light rain had begun to fall, dampening the half-built houses in the distance. Diane thought she was punishing me into submission. Instead, she had just handed me the allies I needed to win this war. Tomorrow would be different. I would stop playing defense. My grandfather always said, the best trap isn't one your enemy walks into. It's the one they help build without realizing it. Diane had just given me the final pieces. My water had been shut off the day before. This morning, the electricity followed. I stood in my grandfather's kitchen, staring at spoiled food in the now warm refrigerator. Diane Reynolds thought she could bully me off my own land by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. I grabbed my notebook and headed out. If Diane wanted a war, I needed allies. The first stop was Mrs. Thompson, who answered her door in a flowered housecoat. They shut off your utilities? She gasped. That's illegal. So is building on my land, I replied. But Diane has friends in the county office. I need to know, who else hates the HOA as much as we do? Her eyes lit up. Oh, honey, grab a chair. This might take a while. She gave me 15 names. Families who had been fined for the wrong colored mailbox, elderly couples threatened with liens because their grandkids visited too often, a single mom who couldn't afford the $900 fee just to put up a small fence for her toddler's safety. I spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Sunny Pines. At first, people were hesitant, afraid. But when I showed them my property documents, something changed. Hope replaced fear. Sarah Jenkins, whose garden had been forcibly removed, invited me inside for lemonade. Diane made my husband dig up our tomato plants, she said, hands shaking with anger, because vegetables weren't aesthetically pleasing. Then she fined us $500. My husband works 2 jobs already. The Patel family had spent $3,000 fighting the HOA over their porch swing. The Johnsons weren't allowed to paint their front door the color they wanted. Every house looked exactly the same, beige with white trim. It's not just the rules, Trevor Martinez explained, while his wife Maria nodded beside him. It's how they enforce them. Diane drives around taking pictures of violations. Some people get warnings, others get instant fines. There's no fairness. By sunset, I had spoken to 27 families, all with similar stories, all afraid of Diane Reynolds. I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Wallace. Can we legally form a competing homeowners association? I asked. On your land? Absolutely, he replied. But what about the existing homes? Now that, he said, is where things get interesting. I took a deep breath. I'm going to need the community center for a meeting tomorrow night. Wallace chuckled. They'll never let you use it. They don't own it. I smiled. I do. According to my property lines, remember? The next day, I printed 200 flyers. Emergency community meeting, your home may be at risk. I included copies of the original property survey. As darkness fell, the community center filled beyond capacity. 97 families showed up. When the chairs ran out, people stood against the walls. Diane Reynolds arrived last, pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. This meeting is unauthorized, she snapped. Everyone needs to leave immediately. Sarah Jenkins stood up. Or what? More fines? Haven't you taken enough from us already? The room erupted in applause. I stepped to the front, holding up my hands for quiet. Come here to cause trouble, I said. I came because my grandfather's land was stolen. But after meeting all of you, I realized I'm not the only victim. For the next hour, residents shared stories of HOA abuse. Tears flowed. Voices trembled with frustration. Diane sat stiffly in the back, furiously typing on her phone. Finally, when everyone had spoken, I took a deep breath. Here's what I propose, I said. We form the Meadow Creek Homeowners Coalition. Together, we negotiate new property lines that are fair to everyone. We create a new community agreement, one with reasonable rules and transparent finances. You can't do that, Diane shrieked. These homes are bound by contract to Sunny Pines HOA. I held up the original land survey. Contracts based on fraudulent property ownership aren't valid, Miss Reynolds. The room went silent. But I'm not here to take anyone's home, I continued. I'm here to fix what's broken. The vote was nearly unanimous. 89 families joined the coalition on the spot. As people filed out, energized and hopeful, I felt the tide turning. Then, Gerald Jenkins, the HOA treasurer, approached me, glancing nervously toward Diane across the room. There's something you should know, he whispered. The HOA finances. They don't add up. Monthly dues keep increasing, but our reserves are shrinking. I've tried to look into it, but Diane controls all the accounts. I patted his shoulder. Would you be willing to show me the books? He nodded. Tomorrow morning. My office. Before I could respond, Diane stormed over, her face twisted in fury. She jabbed a finger in my face. You've made a terrible mistake, she seethed. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever coming to Meadow Creek. I held my ground. Is that a threat, Miss Reynolds? It's a promise. She smirked. I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the local judge on speed dial. This little rebellion ends now. What she didn't know was that a reporter from the Meadow Creek Gazette had been sitting quietly in the back of the meeting. Every word had been recorded, every threat documented. As Diane slammed the door behind her, my phone buzzed. Mr. Wallace, environmental survey results came in. You won't believe what's on that land. I smiled. Diane thought she held all the power, but Grandpa always said, truth is the most powerful weapon of all. And tomorrow, the truth about Sunny Pines HOA would be front page news. The next morning, I woke up to police cars surrounding my grandfather's farmhouse. Through the window, I spotted Diane Reynolds standing next to a tall man in uniform. Time to face the music. I stepped outside. You're trespassing on private property, the police chief announced. I smiled calmly. Actually, Chief Williams, I believe you'll find I'm the legal property owner. I handed him a folder, the original land surveys and my grandfather's deed. Diane scoffed. These documents haven't been verified. They have, actually. A woman stepped forward from a car I hadn't noticed. Carolyn Mitchell, County Records Office. She held up a stack of paperwork. We pulled the original surveys last night after receiving some concerning reports. Diane's face went pale. What reports? She demanded. I gestured toward the farmhouse. Perhaps we should discuss this inside. Coffee's ready. 15 minutes later, my kitchen table held an unexpected gathering. The police chief, the county records clerk, Mr. Wallace, my attorney, and Diane, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. Carolyn spread maps across the table. The original property lines were improperly recorded in 1973, she explained. This entire area, including the existing Sunny Pines homes and the new construction, legally belongs to the Richards estate. The police chief whistled. That's quite a mistake. Not a mistake, Mr. Wallace said quietly. We have evidence suggesting the boundary change was deliberate. Ridiculous. Diane slammed her hand on the table. This is a scam to extort money from hardworking homeowners. Speaking of money, I slid a folder toward the police chief. Gerald Jenkins provided these financial records yesterday. 3 years of Sunny Pines HOA accounts. The chief flipped through the pages. His expression darkened. Miss Reynolds, can you explain why $427,000 in homeowner dues was transferred to Sunshine Consulting LLC? Diane straightened. That's our legitimate management company. I leaned forward. Registered to your son-in-law, along with 4 other companies that charge the HOA for landscaping, security, maintenance, and legal counsel, all owned by your family members. The chief closed the folder. Miss Reynolds, we're going to need you to come down to the station. Diane sputtered. This is absurd. Do you know who I am? My husband plays golf with Judge Harrington every Sunday. As the chief led a protesting Diane out, Carolyn turned to me. What happens now? Those people's homes? I met her gaze. I have no intention of evicting anyone, I assured her. But the development needs to stop until we can properly survey the wetlands. I continued, my voice steady. First, every existing homeowner will receive proper legal deeds to their property. No one will lose their home. Murmurs of relief spread through the crowd. Second, the new development will be redesigned to protect the wetlands that my grandfather cherished. These aren't just swamps, they're critical habitats and natural flood protection for the entire area. I clicked to the next slide, revealing my grandfather's original environmental studies. These wetlands are home to 3 endangered species. Building on them isn't just wrong, it's illegal under federal law. A man in the crowd stood up. I put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to my investment? A fair question. We're establishing a property exchange program, I explained. Anyone who purchased in the protected area can swap for an equivalent lot in the redesigned development. No one loses their investment. For the next hour, I outlined my vision. A community that balanced homes with nature, transparent governance, reasonable rules, fair fees that actually improved the neighborhood. Then, Sarah Jenkins took the microphone. I've lived under Diane's rules for 8 years, she said. I couldn't paint my door blue, couldn't grow tomatoes, couldn't let my kids play outside after 7 p.m. because it violated the noise ordinance. She scanned the room. Is that really the community we want? A hush fell over the crowd. By the time the meeting ended, we had over 300 signatures supporting the new Meadow Creek Community Association. Even some of Diane's former allies joined, including Gerald Jenkins, who agreed to help untangle the financial mess. 1 year later, the next 6 months weren't easy. Diane hired expensive lawyers trying every trick to overturn our claims, but the evidence was too strong. She eventually accepted a plea deal on the financial fraud charges. And now, 1 year later, I sit on my grandfather's porch, watching kids ride bikes past houses with doors painted every color of the rainbow. The community garden is thriving. Sarah's tomatoes growing tall as neighbors swap gardening tips. Behind me, Grandpa's farmhouse has been transformed into our new community center, a place for classes, meetings, and celebrations. The wetlands, protected forever, with walking trails and educational signs explaining the importance of each plant and animal. Mrs. Thompson joins me on the porch, handing me a glass of lemonade. Your grandfather would be bursting with pride, she says, pointing to where construction has finally resumed on the redesigned development. Smaller homes, more green space, solar panels on every roof. I smile, pulling out an old, faded notebook. I found this while cleaning out his study, Grandpa's journal from 30 years ago. He fought the original developers back then, too, when they first tried to build on the wetlands. Mrs. Thompson chuckles. He always said you were just like him, stubborn as a mule when fighting for what's right. In the distance, a blue heron rises from the protected marsh, soaring over homes where people now live in harmony with the land. And I realize, sometimes the best trap isn't about catching someone doing wrong. It's about showing them a better way to do right. Diane's HOA tried to steal my land, but instead they gave me something far more valuable,